We have this collective habit of treating history like a museum exhibit. We tend to put the past behind a really thick sheet of plexiglass.
Right.
You
Yeah.
walk up to it, you read the little bronze plaque with the dates, you look at the artifacts safely quarantined inside, and then, you just walk away.
Yeah.
The past stays in the past, neat and contained.
It's a psychological defense mechanism, really.
Mm.
If we can put a definitive end date on an event, we don't have to deal with its messiness in our daily lives.
Totally.
We just prefer our historical timelines to have clean, hard stops.
Exactly. But every so often, you encounter a moment where an institution walks up to that museum display and just completely shatters the glass.
Mm-hmm.
A moment where a massive global body reaches back across hundreds of years and pulls an event right out of the archives and drops it onto the current diplomatic table. Suddenly, history is not just an artifact anymore.
It's in the room with us.
Yes, demanding immediate attention. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us. Today, our mission is to unpack a really concentrated, globally significant report about a newly passed UN General Assembly resolution.
And this resolution centers entirely on the transatlantic slave trade, the historical narrative around it, and this is key, a highly active modern push for international reparations.
Right. But before we get into the weeds, we need to lay down a quick impartiality disclaimer for you. Because this topic involves global politics and, centuries of historical justice, we have to establish that our role today is strictly analytical.
Absolutely. We are not here to take political sides, left or right, or to endorse any specific national viewpoint.
Not at all.
Our objective is just to impartially decode the diplomatic architecture of this moment so you can fully understand the weight of the conversation happening on the global stage right now.
And wow, the weight of this particular conversation is just staggering. So on Wednesday, the UN General Assembly officially passed a resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans, and this is a direct quote, the gravest crime against humanity.
We really need to pause and examine the semantic weight of that exact phrase. What's fascinating here is that in the realm of international law and global diplomacy, crimes against humanity is already the absolute ceiling.
Right, it's the worst of the worst.
Exactly. It is the top-tier classification reserved for the most systemic, horrific acts imaginable. So it is not a phrase deployed lightly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that makes the addition of the word gravest so fascinating to me. Large bureaucratic institutions, especially an assembly of 193 member states where, every single comma is debated in multiple languages, they don't throw around absolute superlatives by accident.
No, never. They use words like diplomatic scalpels.
Right, so why use gravest? If an institution that represents the globe chooses the word gravest, how does that shift the global conversation from a passive historical acknowledgement to, an active indictment? Doesn't ranking pain create diplomatic friction?
It does, and that is precisely why this specific language is so unprecedented. Historically, diplomatic bodies avoid ranking atrocities for that exact reason.
Makes sense.
They vastly prefer broad, inclusive categories that acknowledge suffering without creating a hierarchy. But by breaking that unwritten rule and deploying the word gravest, the General Assembly is essentially arguing that the systemic commodification and trafficking of human beings in this specific context forms a unique baseline.
It kind of strips away any lingering passive voice from the historical record, doesn't it?
It forces a complete reckoning. They didn't call it a historical tragedy. They didn't call it a dark chapter.
Right.
By calling it the gravest crime, they're telling the globe that this is the ultimate architectural pillar of what constitutes an offense against the human condition. There's zero room for diplomatic soft-pedaling.
It's the linguistic equivalent of dropping an anchor. And the justification for why this event commands that unparalleled superlative naturally stems from its sheer scale and its duration.
The numbers are just, yeah.
Right, which brings us to the staggering numbers provided by Ghana during these proceedings.
Yeah.
Ghana cited that at least 12.5 million Africans were taken and sold. And the timeline attached to this is between the 15th and 19th centuries.
We have to try to conceptualize what those parameters actually mean, because human brains are just notoriously terrible at processing massive numbers in vast stretches of time.
Oh, totally. We hear millions and it just blurs.
It just turns into an abstract academic concept.
I completely agree. It loses its human shape instantly. So here's where it gets really interesting. Let's try to ground that number first for you listening. 12.5 million people. If we look at modern geography, that is the equivalent of emptying out the entire metropolitan population of a megacity.
Just completely gone.
Right. Imagine a city the size of London or Sao Paulo or Tokyo, just entirely emptied. But the mechanism wasn't a singular event. It was systematically executed generation after generation for 400 years.
4 entire centuries. That is the critical element here. To put a 400-year duration into perspective, that's the lifespan of entire empires.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that covers the transition from the late Middle Ages right through the Renaissance and into the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about roughly 20 generations of human beings born into a system of sustained global extraction.
It fundamentally changes the definition of an event.
Exactly. When we think of historical trauma, we usually think of a war or a regime or a momentary policy failure that lasts, a few years or maybe a decade.
Right.
But a 400-year continuous enterprise is an era-defining economic engine. When Ghana cites that 15th to 19th century timeline on the floor of the UN, they're forcing the international community to look at the deep systemic institutionalization of the act. For 4 centuries, it wasn't an anomaly in the system. It was the system.
Okay, but I want to push back a little on how a modern audience receives that timeline. Because the moment you say the 15th and the 19th century, a massive psychological barrier goes up.
Oh, for sure.
It's incredibly easy for someone today to just say, that is a horrific tragedy, but it's ancient history. The 19th century ended over 100 years ago. It's a closed chapter. How does the source material keep this from just being dismissed as an isolated history lesson?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, they do it by explicitly refusing to let the timeline end in the 19th century. And this is where Ghana's argument fundamentally bridges the historical gap.
Okay.
They state that the UN resolution is necessary right now because the consequences of slavery actively persist today. They don't frame this as a historical artifact at all.
They frame it as an ongoing living condition, and they specifically point to racial disparities as the persisting consequence. This is where the glass of the museum exhibit truly shatters.
Exactly. Think about the logic they're employing. Ghana is arguing for a direct, unbroken causal link between that 400-year extraction and modern systemic issues.
So what does this all mean for the listener?
It means they're asking the global community to view history not as a series of disconnected events, but as the living foundation of the house we all currently occupy.
Let's run with that architectural idea, actually, because I think it perfectly illustrates the logic of the resolution. Imagine inheriting a massive, sprawling estate.
Sure.
For the first 400 years of its existence, the original architects systematically extracted essential materials from the foundation of the East Wing to build up and reinforce the West Wing.
Right.
Today, you move into the building. You didn't pour the concrete. You didn't oversee the extraction of those materials centuries ago. But when you walk into the East Wing and the floor is tilted at a severe 20-degree angle, you are actively experiencing the consequence of that initial action.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
You don't look at the tilted floor today and say, well, the pouring of the foundation was a long time ago, so this uneven floor is just ancient history. The uneven floor is the active present-day manifestation of that historical engineering.
And that is the exact logical mechanism Ghana is using when they point to modern racial disparities.
Yeah.
They're arguing that these disparities, whether they're economic, social, or institutional, they are the uneven floors.
Right.
They are the direct, measurable result of a foundational flaw that was systematically engineered over 4 centuries. If the foundation was built on the trafficking of 12.5 million people, you can't simply paint the walls today and declare the building structurally sound.
Which completely shifts the nature of the international debate. If someone argues, well, nobody alive today committed those acts, this diplomatic stance directly counters that. It effectively says the past isn't dead at all. It's just evolved.
Yes, exactly.
The mechanism of the 15th and 19th centuries has manifested into present-day disparities. How does establishing this ongoing consequence set the stage for the specific actions the UN is calling for?
This raises an important question because it forces a massive logical pivot. If you establish, as step 1, that a crime is the gravest in human history,
Right.
and you establish as step 2 that its structural consequences are actively persisting today, then a mere diplomatic apology is mathematically insufficient.
Yeah.
You cannot just apologize for an action if the consequence of that action is still actively causing structural damage.
Which brings us to the specific remedy proposed in this UN resolution. It was heavily championed by Ghana and its president, John Dramani Mahama. He actually delivered a speech to the United Nations under a very specific thematic banner.
A very telling banner.
Right. It was titled The Grave Crime, Seeking Global Reparations for Slavery. And the resolution itself explicitly calls for reparations as a concrete step towards remedying historical wrongs.
The phrase concrete step is where the rubber meets the road here. For decades, international bodies have been highly comfortable with symbolic gestures.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of statements.
Right? They will issue statements of profound regret. They'll draft beautifully worded formal apologies for historical events. But introducing the word concrete alongside the demand for reparations transforms the entire discourse.
It's the difference between sending a get-well-soon card and actually paying the hospital bill.
That's exactly it. It shifts the conversation from a symbolic acknowledgement of a past wrong into a demand for tangible, structural restitution in the present.
But notice what the source material doesn't say. It calls for reparations as a concrete step, but it strategically avoids defining exactly what those reparations look like.
Yes, the deliberate ambiguity is key here.
Is it direct financial payouts? Is it massive structural debt forgiveness for African nations? Is it a complete overhaul of global institutional voting rights? The resolution leaves the how completely open, but it makes the necessity for a concrete step mandatory.
Right.
How does an international body enforce a mandate when they haven't even defined the mechanism?
Well, by understanding that in global diplomacy, you have to build the ideological container before you can fill it. What the UN and Ghana are doing here is laying down the unshakable legal and philosophical architecture.
Okay, lay that out for us.
First, you get the globe to agree on the premise. It was the gravest crime, the effects are ongoing, and a concrete remedy is therefore required. Once you secure that global consensus on the principle, you've firmly set the mandate.
Ah, I see.
You leave the logistics, the really messy, incredibly complex financial and political negotiations, for future summits. But you have successfully trapped the international community within their own agreed-upon logic.
Wow.
They can no longer debate if a step is needed, only what that step will be.
It is a masterclass in establishing an institutional baseline. President Mahama's speech uses the UN's own massive platform to essentially tell the global community that it can no longer hide behind rhetorical apologies. The demand is to put international resources where the diplomatic rhetoric is. And the source actually points out something that really grounds this in the modern day. The proceedings and the push from Ghana are heavily associated with the digital tag #DoAfrica.
I'm so glad you brought that up because the juxtaposition there is incredible.
Isn't it? We're looking at a modern, real-time social media hashtag mechanism designed for instantaneous global communication attached directly to a debate about a 400-year-old historical trauma.
It's the perfect encapsulation of how the past and the present are completely woven together in this moment.
Yeah.
It proves that this isn't some dusty archival debate happening in a windowless room. The hashtag #DoAfrica demonstrates that this is a highly active, heavily scrutinized current event.
Tracked by millions in real time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The institutional language at the UN has finally caught up to the historical reality, and now the entire globe is watching to see how the physical reality of international law will catch up to the institutional language.
It really requires us to rethink everything we assume about the timeline of human events. I mean, we've walked through some incredibly dense diplomatic architecture today. We started with the UN's unprecedented choice to declare the trafficking of enslaved Africans the gravest crime against humanity.
A superlative that permanently alters the hierarchy of international law.
Absolutely. We explored the staggering, multi-generational reality of 12.5 million lives extracted over 4 centuries, and how that sustained economic engine fundamentally shaped the modern world.
And crucially, we examined the logical bridge Ghana built between those centuries of extraction and the modern-day racial disparities we see across the globe, proving that historical actions have active, present-day structural consequences.
Right, which culminated in the push by President Dramani Mahama and the UN General Assembly to demand reparations not as a symbolic gesture, but as a mandatory concrete step toward a tangible remedy.
It's a profound shift from passive memory to active accountability.
It really is. And as we wrap up our exploration today, we just want to quickly reiterate that our goal was simply to decode the arguments, the strategies, and the powerful language presented in this diplomatic moment. We hope this impartial breakdown helps you understand the deep, mechanical layers of this massive global conversation.
And to leave you with a final thought, to mull over consider the legal and philosophical door that this resolution has just opened.
Oh, this is a big one.
It really is. If the global community at the highest levels of the UN is now formally recognizing that a 400-year-old historical event requires concrete, present-day structural remedies, what precedent does this set for international law moving forward?
Right.
In the eyes of global justice, how far back does the statute of limitations on historical wrongs truly go?
Man, that brings us right back to that shattered museum glass, doesn't it? The